So welcome everyone on Central Nervous System's Acumatica training class. This week is on security for administrators. Have a look. So just a brief overview of our training classes. We cover different topics on a week-to-week basis. It's a service that we have available to our clients to help with training, onboarding new staff, and getting new pieces of information as they become available. You can find these training classes at acumaticaengineering.com/acumatica-training. On the right-hand side, you'll see a little sneak preview of what's coming next. So today, security for administrators. Next week, we'll have a look at month-end process and financial closing procedures. And then following that, we will dive into approval maps. Every class will be recorded and available to you, so you'll be able to step away if need be and come back to any maintenance or any training class that you'd like to touch base on, and they can again be used as a good tool for any new employees that are onboarded to the company. The good thing about these training classes is that there's an opportunity to ask questions. And if those are asked, we'll take some time at the end of our presentation to review those questions, get out some answers, and whatever we don't have time for, we will post a follow-up video to our blog with those answers, which can be found at acumaticaengineering.com/blog. Head over to our agenda now. Quite a bit of material to cover today. Some of it may be rudimentary, some of it may or may not be applicable to you, depending on the company or tenant setup that you have in Acumatica. But nonetheless, we'll look to touch on most of the topics, as well as dive into some of the more standard setup settings and configuration that are required. So today we're going to be looking at an overview of the security preferences and what's available with Acumatica. We're going to have a look at a user setup and linking it to a entity, so an employee account. We're going to have a look at changing personal settings and the options that are available there, looking at user roles and assigning rights to those roles, assigning roles to users, and how the interconnectivity of those pieces work together. We're going to have a look at some of the organizational options that are allowed to restrict visibility, set passwords, as well as group security. So let's hop in. So an overview of system security. Acumatica AUP collects, stores, and processes sensitive corporate data that must be protected against unauthorized use. So the user security includes things like user access, so managing access to the system as a whole. It touches on restricting access to information, so managing access rights for users to certain parts of the system. So we want finance people being able to access finance related material. We might not want, operators, warehouse staff, contractors accessing that information. So we can restrict that. We want to look at enforcing site security, so setting up specific security policies and auditing activities. So that comes in the form of setting up things like two-factor authentication. We want to maybe set up certain password policies, such as making sure that there's a number, making sure there's a uppercase, making sure there's a unique character, things like that, forcing password refreshes every 2 or 3 months. And then we're also going to look at what options are available to encrypt sensitive information stored in the system. So security-wide policy, We're going to hop into Acumatica right away here. So this is the security preferences screen that we're going to be reviewing. So let's take a look. So user security over here on user preferences. I'm logged in as the administrator of the system, so I will see everything. But let's have a look at what security preferences are available. But within Acumatica, we've got the option here to set up some password policies. So we can force users to change passwords every 30 days, every 60 days, every 90 days, if that's something that's desired. It helps to make sure things like malware and password hacking um, doesn't get an opportunity to get a password, and then it's valid forever until that user specifically changes his or her password. Um, I'm going to go back and save here. We can set a minimum password length. So in this case, we've got 3 characters. It's a demo site, but in a more um, uh, multi-branch, multi-corporate environment, you might want something like 8 or 10 characters. And then, of course, we can start to put in some complexity requirements. So complexity requirements might be requiring an uppercase letter, requiring a number, requiring a unique character, things of that nature to make sure that passwords are strong and secure. The other good thing about Acumatica is two-factor authentication. So with any SaaS environment um, and confidential information, might be used to something like a bank account login or a government website that you need two-factor authentication. Well, Acumatica allows that as well. It allows you to use to set it for required every time, or maybe required for unknown devices. And the two-factor authentication could be through SMS, so text message to a user phone, or an email to a company email address. So those options are available to add another level of security. And then we've got some other things here like account lockout. So if a user enters a bad password, then there'll be a lockout after 3 unsuccessful attempts, forcing that user to go back to a system administrator and reset that password. Or it'll lock out for a certain amount of time, which we can set here, and a reset lockout count after 10 minutes. So updating these policies will secure you against malware access or um, malicious activity. So the overall user interface can only be edited by the administrator. Of course, users are able to set up their own preferences and whatnot. And then down here, we've got some auditing options. So the ability for Acumatica to keep an audit history. We've set 999 months here, but you may not need that much. But we want history for things like login, licenses exceeded, when you have a log out, when there's a login that's been failed, when there's any errors that have occurred with emails or successes and things of that nature, just to keep track of activity. But I would say login failed, session expired are some key pieces. OData refresh is being able to access the information in Acumatica from outside of Acumatica. So that might be a piece of information you want to keep track of, as well as maybe customizations if anybody's going into that and changing any customizations in Acumatica. Down here, Acumatica's got the option to add an encryption certificate, or you can add your own if you'd like for added layer of security. And then we've got some allowed external identity providers. So here we've got Exchange Identity Token, Google, and Microsoft account. And of course, these can be removed and more added as needed. So that's the overall security preference options that we have. Let's hop back to our demo presentation. and look at what we have here. So this is kind of what we reviewed on that page. Again, password policies, multi-factor authentication with two-factor authentication. Um, we looked at the lockout policies that are available. So again, number of failed sign-in attempts will cause a user account to be locked out for X minutes. Now, system users. So this is where we now um, take those system-wide preferences and we now create and apply to users when we're creating new users in the system. So an individual must have a user account to access Acumatica. Each account includes a login, a password, and some other properties, as well as designated access rights that are set up, which we'll be diving into. User accounts can be local or external, so Active Directory, or just a direct login into Acumatica. So again, we're going to look at the user account setup page, but in brief, before I hop into it, we're going to see this page and we see, there's a login, there's a password which will be generated when we first create the user. You could choose to set that password up for the first time um, and enter a temporary password. We want to put in as much of this information as possible. So first name, last name, and then a linked entity. So a linked entity is, if the user is an employee, linking it to that employee within Acumatica will give that user access to those employee-specific features, like entering time cards, entering expense receipts, and things like that. And then we want some configuration of settings, and then down here we have roles. So let's dive into that. Let's have a look at user account. We're looking at Andrews here, so let's have a sneak peek. So again, Andrews, we've got allow password recovery, so the ability for Andrews to recover his password if he forgets it. We are allowing Andrew or Michael to change his password, and we're saying that his password never expires. Now, if this was a newly created user, we have the option to select force user to change password on the next login, or in the example or in the event that Michael had his password compromised, we could reset his password, set a temporary password. Maybe that's a corporate temporary password. Provide that to Michael, and select this force user to change password on the next login, so that when he does log in, it will force him to enter a new unique password. Okay. So key pieces to get a user started up is we need a login and we need an email, but of course we want some of this other info set up, specifically if it's a linked entity to an employee. And then we also want to perhaps put in a user type. So what a user type does is it limits the number of roles that are available, in this case for general employees. If I were to remove this user type, it may expand this list to a greater number of options. If I were to change it to perhaps a sales employee, it will restrict it to certain things. So we saw that as a general employee, it had access to quite a number of options. So we can select AP, clerk, admin, AR, and a whole bunch more, customizer, financial accounting, the GLs, and things like that. But for a sales employee, these are the only available roles and options that are configured to them. So heading back to general employee, we will now touch on a couple of the roles and how they work. So in this particular case for Andrews or Michael, he's been assigned the administrator role, which will more than likely give Andrews access to all of the functions, which is why none of these specific roles have been selected. However, if we were to go to somebody else, For instance, let's try um, Jane Doe. Let's see. Jane Doe is also a general employee, but Jane has not been given administrator access. She's been given consultant access, employee access to access tasks, approvals, and expenses, and that's it. If we pick, somebody else, Yona, we have differences again. So employee, internal user, and it's a service tech role only. So that's how we're able to distinguish which rules are applied to which users. Okay. Another thing that I want to touch on, and we'll go back to Andrew's for this, um, is the personal settings. So personal settings, if we've got different branches or different companies. I mean, in this particular demo box, we've got 3 companies and 4 branches, but here we see, one's in Edmonton and one is in Houston. So if this particular employee or any employee was stationed in Edmonton, we may want to select a specific time zone for that employee so that when they're entering their time cards, when they're logging in and their activities, they're going to be reported in that time zone. Whereas Houston may be different. We want to select the default branch that person logs into when they log in. So in this case, Andrew's got access to all the branches, but let's say the main branch that Andrew's worked in was the headquarters, wholesale headquarters. We can set that as the default for when he logs in. And then, of course, we can also put a home page. So a lot of people like having or going to their employee dashboard as a home page. If Michael is manager, he might be looking to go to the management dashboard. And so those configuration settings can be set. And then, of course, users can update them when they log in as well. Okay, so now that we looked at roles, let's go back to our demo and touch on that to see what roles mean. So user roles, users in similar positions generally perform similar tasks. Roles can be thought of as requirements for the positions. So an example of that might be you have a small team of people in accounts payable. You have um, um, maybe 3 or 4 accounts payable clerks. Well, they're likely all perform similar tasks. So you'd be able to assign each of those employees or users the AP clerk role, and then they would be given very similar access to the to Acumatica. So again, rather than assigning access rights to each user for each object in the system, it's easier to set access rights to roles and then assign those roles to users. So users are assigned one or multiple roles, and then based on these assignments, users are granted the appropriate levels of access. So rather than going access rights directly to users, we want to give access rights to roles. And then we want to assign those roles to users. So as users need more access, they just simply be assigned more roles. So at the time of deployment, a list of built-in roles had been added to your system. For example, AP admin and internal user. Each role is set up with access rights for specific job responsibilities. Again, those can be adjusted. You want to look to select or deselect roles assigned to each user, and we touched on that already. Okay, so let's go and have a look at user roles and those access rights. So to add a new role, we're going to head over to the user roles page. We're going to, and then we could review this after, but um, the key here is, system objects are grouped in a tree with nodes. And at each level of nodes, access rights are propagated to the nested objects or nested objects inherit access rights from their parents. And so once those rules are created or made, they get applied to the company tree in the sense of in terms of access and navigation. And being able to apply those rules to that tree has a hierarchy of tenant, workspace, form, container of form elements, and then form elements. And let's touch on that now. So if we head over to user security, let's just go back into user roles here, and we have a bunch. So, so if we were to look at, consultants. So by looking up the role of consultant, we're able to see which users are part of the consultant role, and we've got a number of users here. If we were to look at, access to GL functions and settings, none. Internal employee probably has a big list because we've got a lot of employees. Sales, we've got a number of people in sales, but how many sales managers? Just 5. And so let's go and look at also maybe, so we've got AP clerk. We've got 1 AP clerk. We've got 1 AP admin. And we got 1 AP viewer. Let's look at something with a little bit more. Yeah, let's look at AP. So AP clerk. So now what we can do is we know who has access or who's part of these roles. What we want to do next is see what are the access rights by that role? What rights does that role have? So at this access by role page, we're able to select the role. And so in this case, let's do AP clerk, so access to AP functions. And right at the company page, you know, we have a setting here. So banking, we've got multiple rights in banking. We've got multiple rights in contract management. We've got multiple rights in data views, finance, inventory, payables, of course, projects and purchases. But we also see a lot of pages that this this role has no ability to look at. So, certainly not going into time and expenses. We're not allowing this rule to look at user security. We're not allowing this rule to look at payroll. And so the hierarchy again, company, then the next level is workspace. So, let's look at the payables workspace, which is here. This is our workspace. So if we look at payables now, which is the next level down, we start to see a number of different access rights, which with a little bit more definition. So, 1099 vendor history, an AP has the ability to delete the vendor history on 1099. They've been granted the ability to look at 1099 details. They're only able to view account payable preferences. They are not able to delete account payable references or alter accounts payable references. They've been granted the ability to go into all of these pieces here. And what do these pieces represent? Let's just duplicate my tab here. So if I head into payables and I show all, we start to see, bills and adjustments, bills pending approval. So, bills and adjustments, um, bills pending payments. That's what these refer to. And you see that by expanding this list here. Okay. So with bills and adjustments, there's probably a number of different things. So with bills and adjustments, there's some different options. Do we want this role to be able to adjust them? Do we want them to be able to approve them? Um, alter the line? And so when we start to see things like inherited, they're inherited from a higher level of access. So because bills and adjustments is part of the payables workspace, and delete has been given to that workspace for bills and adjustment, everything within the bills and adjustments is therefore inherited. So understanding the hierarchy of access rights and being able to update accordingly will um, allow you to set roles and those rights and at a higher level, and then have those access rights granted all the way down. Um, or you can go more granite and dive into each piece or section and begin to make those changes. The other option here, and I'll head over to my tool, is access rights by screen. So we looked at the company and giving access rights to the role from a hierarchy of company workspace, workspace details, and so forth. But access rights by screen gives administrators the ability to set up access rights to multiple system objects for multiple rules. So um, let's have a look at that. So if I were to go to bills and adjustments, taking a moment here. Okay, so this particular page is the AP 3010 page. If I want to look at who has access or what roles have access to the screen, I can click on Tools, go Access Rights. And so again, there's that tree. And on the screen, so bills and payments, there it is, AP 3010. We can look at that and we can see, okay, well, Acumatica administrators have delete. AP viewers only can view. And then, every other role for the most part, other than AP, can't really see it except for, this demo role. Um, internal users and portal users have been revoked. Sales managers can delete. That's about it. If I were to open up the bill, this is a different screen. So this is the, again, back into the AP 3010 screen. But if we dive into access right, it'll give me the specific page. And again, an option to review. Now, if I wanted to add access rights here, we could say we want to add AP viewer to have a look at the bills and say, okay, view only. We could do that. And it will give access to the AP viewer role to the bill screen. And again, looking at these options, delete is the highest level. Insert gives users the ability to add or update parameters or settings. Looking at editing gives the user the ability to edit something. View is obviously just a view, and then revoked is gone. But delete is the highest level because um, we want the ability for AP admins and clerks to delete AP bills, especially if there's an error or something. But we don't want the viewer to be able to do that, and that's why there's a difference. And once that's updated, you can hit save here, and it should update the role to allow AR viewers to view only. And anybody that's within the AR viewer role or has access to that role will be able to view. All right, let's head back branch level access. Next topic. So overall, this provides the ability to limit or restrict access to branches in multiple branch or multiple company setups. And what we do here is um, we create a role for each company or branch, and then we assign that role to employees that need that different access. So we can further expand visibility restriction to customers and vendors if this option is selected. So let's look at what that means. So what that means is I'll close this page. So up here, I'm logged in as an admin. I've got 3 companies and I've got 4 branches. So I've got liquid action architecture, engineering, and environmental services. Those are my 3 companies. I got 4 branches. I got Seattle, Vancouver, Edmonton, Houston. So if I were to look at Andrew's access rights here, he has access to environmental and architecture, but he does not have access to the engineering um, branch. Admin, which is what I'm logged in now, has access to all 3. So the unique benefit of this is, again, if you've got certain employees that are working in certain offices that are different and don't need access to the other branch activities or the other branch customers, you are able to limit that access through the access roles options or through the role setup. So in this case, I'm admin. If I were to remove, say, let's remove, right now I can go into engineering. Right? If I head back to architecture and I remove engineering from the admin access and I save that, trying to go into it won't work. But of course, I can go into a different branch and I can go into Edmonton and I can go back to Vancouver architecture. Okay. So the branch cap, and so where that's set up is in different companies. This all ties back to the configuration of the company. So if I were to look up companies, there it is. I leave page. We've got our liquid faction engineering, architecture, and environmental sciences. So if we were to open up, engineering, it is a company without branches. But down here, we see that the configuration settings dictate that the branch cap LF engineering is the access role that's tied to this company. If it's left blank, there's no access role. But anybody who's assigned the LF engineering branch cap access role will have access to this company. That's how everything ties together. So we've got a company, we've created a company or branch role, we've connected the company to that role, and then we assign users or employees that role to give them access. Okay, and so now that we've got this multiple branch, multiple company setup, the next option that's available is visibility restriction. So again, accommodating multiple companies with their own accounting departments to be configured within the same tenant. So it allows users to limit access to customer and vendor accounts to employees of a particular company or branch. If a customer or vendor record is associated with a company or branch, the customer can be accessed by users assigned to the role specified for the branch. If a customer or vendor record is not associated with a company or branch, it could be accessed by any user. So let's have a look and see what that means. So first thing, we're going to go into the enable and disable features under licensing. And so when you have multiple branches and multiple companies as a system administrator, there is this option under financials that says customer and vendor visibility restriction. So over here, that's turned on. Now, what does that mean? So once that's turned on, you'll get this option here. Now let's have a look at customers, for instance, which would, or even payables. Let's look at vendors. And if we were to open one up, and we go to financial, we've got this restrict visibility to option. So in this case, it's blank. So anybody from any branch or any company can see Alta Ace as a AA customer vendor. However, if I want to restrict visibility only to the services company or the products company, I could do that. And by doing that and updating it, only users who are granted access to this products company will be able to look at the AA customer. So again, it further enhances the branch level security that's available within Acumatica. All right, heading back to our presentation. So monitoring user activity, something that we touched on when doing the overall security preference setup. So again, Acumatica can monitor and record events triggered by a user or the system with the security audit functionality. So user activities like login, screens accessed, emails processing, and data access. And then it allows us to review the audit trails related to system events. So what we want to do is we want to go to items, user security, and then under inquiries here, we've got a couple options. So we've got access history, which will give me a full list here. And again, a lot of this has been demo, so lots of it is admin, but what we can do is we can limit by user. So if we have a suspicious user, we can limit the user and see what's been done, what operations. We can see when they've logged out, when a customization has been published, when a login has failed, and why, when a session's been expired, things of that nature, and that's user specific. Or we can do a grand search across the whole system and say, okay, how many, what actions happened for sessions expired? When has somebody accessed OData? License exceeded? And again, from which IP address and which host computer? So this is all good information in terms of getting access history. And then we can also look at some audit history here. Let's see what we can do here. So, if we look at what was it? Oh, access history. So within the access history, the key here is logout. Okay. So these dot ones is when somebody is logged in as that person and then logged out. Just an FYI. The audit history refers to being able to put on specific first auditing rules need to be set up for within the preferences. And once those are set up, the audit history will begin to populate. So what we want to do is perhaps maybe we want to put an audit history on who is doing things in the bills and adjustment page. Okay. And maybe we want to track any AP invoices, adjustments, documents. Maybe we want to track everything within that page. We can select these and click save. And from then on, let's go and see if we can do something here. Let's see if we can do something here. We can see if we can start one. And then delete. Let's see if that's enough of a tracking. So if we go back to security, audit history, looks like more setup is needed, which don't have time for, but the ability is available for us to put on specific audit tracking for specific screens and audit specific history on that screen by user, which would be very useful for public corporations in terms of Sarbanes-Oxley audits and things of that nature. Okay, running out of time here. So again, we'll just head back into our review. So we looked at system security preferences and creating an account, linking it to an entity and overviewing the personal settings of those users. We looked at creating user roles and how to assign rights to those roles um, by role or by screen. And then heading back to users, looking at the available roles available that can be applied to users, as well as branch level role access if we want to restrict users to specific branches or companies. And then we touched on some security options with group settings, again, branch level, company level access, and company-wide password options, encryption, and policies, particularly with two-factor. Let's see if we've got any questions. Okay, nothing available. So again, that wraps up our discussion today. Again, weekly training classes. So join us next week for month-end process and financial closing procedures. And then starting June with approval maps. You can go and register for these training sessions at acumaticaengineering.com/acumatica-training. And if you'd like to get another look at this recording, you can head to acumaticaengineering.com/maintenance-classes. All right, take care. Have a good day.